11 Golden Age stars who lived a lie, and Hollywood helped them hide it. The stars of Hollywood's Golden Age weren't just acting on screen. Their biggest performances happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Behind those dazzling smiles, perfect love stories, and wholesome public images lurked secrets so explosive they could have instantly destroyed careers, reputations, and lives. These weren't just celebrities keeping private matters private. They were living elaborate lies engineered by powerful studios willing to do anything to protect their valuable investments. The studio system didn't just create films, it created people, reveals a veteran MGM publicist who worked during Hollywood's heyday. Studios literally owned their stars and controlled every aspect of their public image. If a star's actual life didn't match what audiences wanted, that reality had to be erased and replaced with something marketable. This erasure machine operated with military precision. Studio fixers intimidated witnesses and paid off police. Publicists planted fake stories while burying real ones. Stars entered sham marriages while conducting their authentic lives in shadows. The entire system functioned like a well-oiled deception factory with one goal: selling audiences the lies they wanted to believe. People talk about cancel culture like it's new, says Hollywood historian Margaret Reynolds. In Golden Age Hollywood, careers didn't just end, people's entire identities could be erased if they didn't conform to what studios demanded. The control was absolute, and the consequences for defying it were devastating. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 11 of Hollywood's most shocking double lives. The stars who lived elaborate fictions, while an entire industry worked overtime to maintain their marketable illusions. These aren't just stories of personal secrets. They're windows into a powerful system that valued profitable deception over human truth, and the devastating toll it took on the icons we thought we knew.
It's a lovely evening, isn't it?
Oh, yes, ma'am, it sure is.
You married?
Uh-oh.
The perfect leading man, Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was Hollywood's dream man, literally manufactured to embody everything 1950s America wanted in a masculine ideal. With his towering 6 feet 5 inches frame, square jaw, and easy charm, Hudson personified the all-American male that post-war audiences craved. His on-screen romances with Hollywood's most beautiful actresses reinforced traditional values and reassured a nation looking for stability after global conflict. There was just one problem. It was all a lie. Hudson lived his entire career as a heterosexual heartthrob, while secretly gay, explains entertainment historian Margaret Collins. This wasn't just keeping his private life private. It required constructing an elaborate alternative reality with Hollywood's full cooperation. The studio system, the press, and even unwitting co-stars all became props in maintaining his fictional straight image. Hudson's transformation began with talent agent Henry Wilson, the infamous Hollywood power broker who specialized in creating marketable male stars. Wilson spotted potential in a truck driver named Roy Harold Scherer Jr. and systematically rebuilt him. New name, new backstory, new persona, all designed to hide the one thing that would have instantly destroyed his marketability: his homosexuality. As Hudson's fame grew, so did the elaborate machinery protecting his secret. The studio arranged a sham marriage to Secretary Phyllis Gates, Collins explains. This wasn't Hudson's personal choice, but a calculated business decision. When gay rumors began circulating in the mid-1950s, Universal essentially ordered Hudson to marry Gates, who worked for his agent. The marriage lasted just 3 years, but served its purpose in quelling speculation when his career was skyrocketing. The protection system extended far beyond this arranged marriage into a sophisticated network of suppression that operated at every level of Hollywood power. Hollywood agents blackmailed reporters and buried rumors for decades, notes former entertainment journalist Thomas Henderson. The studios maintained relationships with gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons based on mutual benefit. Columnists who played along by printing approved stories got exclusive access, while those who threatened to publish uncomfortable truths faced blacklisting or worse. When friendly persuasion failed, more direct methods were deployed. Studio fixers, the muscle behind Hollywood's image machine, would use bribery, blackmail, and sometimes physical threats against anyone who might expose stars like Hudson. The studio would trade information, Henderson explains. If a reporter had evidence about Hudson, fixers might offer scandalous information about another star in exchange for silence. They created an elaborate system of traded secrets that protected their most valuable properties, and in the 1950s, few were more valuable than Rock Hudson. The human cost behind this perfect masculine illusion was enormous. Living in constant fear of exposure, Hudson conducted his authentic romantic life in deep secrecy, often relying on trusted friends to create safe environments where he could momentarily stop performing heterosexuality. He kissed women on screen and couldn't be seen holding a man's hand in real life. This painful duality defined Hudson's existence, celebrated for portraying romantic connections that contradicted his authentic desires while forced to hide the relationships that might have brought genuine fulfillment. The elaborate fiction finally collapsed in 1985 when Hudson became one of the first major celebrities to die of AIDS-related complications. His illness forced public acknowledgement of the reality that had been systematically hidden for decades, revealing his authentic identity only when death had made continued concealment impossible. Hudson's legacy represents both the extraordinary success of Hollywood's image-making machinery and its devastating human cost. The system transformed a gay man from Illinois into the ultimate straight heartthrob, creating a deception so convincing it shaped American ideals of masculinity for generations, while forcing the real person behind that image to live in shadows, denied the opportunity to exist authentically in the very spotlight that made him a star.
Motion picture last night starring Loretta Young and Cary Grant, and it's called Born to be Bad. And
The Secret Mother, Loretta Young. Loretta Young pulled off what might be the most audacious deception in Hollywood history. She hid an entire human being in plain sight for nearly 80 years. While many stars concealed aspects of their identity that violated social norms, Young's elaborate fiction involved something far more concrete: her own biological daughter. Young had a secret child with Clark Gable during the filming of Call of the Wild, explains biographer Robert Anderson. This wasn't just a career-threatening scandal. It was potentially career-ending for Young, who had carefully crafted an image as a devout Catholic and moral exemplar. An unwed pregnancy would have violated her contract, which explicitly prohibited moral turpitude, and completely shattered the persona that made her bankable. The affair occurred during remote location shooting in Washington state in 1935. Gable, Hollywood's king, was married to his second wife, while Young had cultivated a reputation for religious piety that made her particularly vulnerable to scandal. When she discovered her pregnancy, Young faced what seemed like an impossible situation with no acceptable options. Abortion contradicted her Catholic faith. Public acknowledgement would end her career. Even private acknowledgement would create untenable complications with Gable, MGM, which had significant interest in protecting their star, and her own studio. The solution Young devised was breathtaking in its audacity, a plan so elaborate it sounds like something from one of her melodramas. Young disappeared from Hollywood, then staged a fake adoption to raise her own daughter, Anderson continues. She announced she was taking a vacation to recover from exhaustion, that classic Hollywood code for everything from plastic surgery to addiction treatment. She traveled briefly to England to establish her alibi, then secretly returned to California, where she remained hidden during her pregnancy. After giving birth to a daughter in November 1935, Young executed Phase 2 of her plan, a fictional adoption of her own biological child. She placed her daughter temporarily in an orphanage, then publicly discovered the child during a supposed search for a suitable orphan to adopt, bringing home her own biological daughter as if finding her by chance. This elaborate fiction became the official story for decades. Young raised her daughter Judy Lewis, who bore a striking resemblance to Gable, including his distinctive ears, while maintaining the adoption narrative throughout Judy's childhood and adult life. Young never told the truth publicly until just before her death, notes Anderson. She maintained this fiction for almost 80 years, only confirming the truth to her authorized biographer shortly before her death in 2000, after decades of speculation and her daughter's own public statements about her parentage. What makes Young's story so revealing about Golden Age Hollywood isn't just the deception itself, but the extensive system that made it possible. Studio publicists, compliant press, and a network of fixers all participated in maintaining the fiction, demonstrating how completely the entertainment industry could control narratives in the pre-internet era. She hid a child for 80 years because the studio said her career wouldn't survive. This extraordinary power imbalance defined the studio system, where even a human being's existence could be concealed or reimagined if acknowledging reality threatened profits. Young's participation in this deception reflected not just personal choice, but the extremely limited options available to women in her position. The human cost extended beyond Young to her daughter, who grew up sensing the truth while being denied confirmation. Judy Lewis described the psychological impact of living within an elaborate fiction, a childhood filled with unspoken tensions and unexplained realities that affected her well into adulthood. Young's story illuminates not just Hollywood's control over stars' images, but its power to literally rewrite reality, creating alternative narratives so convincing they could withstand decades of scrutiny and speculation. The effectiveness of this particular deception demonstrates both the extraordinary reach of studio publicity machines and the fundamentally different information environment of pre-internet entertainment, where carefully managed press relationships could maintain fictions that would collapse instantly today.
Did you know that mental illness claims more victims than any other disease? That's right. One American in every...
America's Boyfriend, Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the perfect 1950s teen idol, the wholesome blonde boy next door whose winning smile graced movie screens and record covers that papered teenage girls' bedrooms across America. His clean-cut image and non-threatening good looks made him the ideal fantasy boyfriend for an era obsessed with projecting traditional values. There was just one glaring problem. America's Boyfriend wasn't interested in dating girls at all. Hunter was a closeted leading man, groomed to be America's boyfriend, notes film historian Margaret Collins. He wasn't just hiding his sexuality to protect his career. He was actively positioned as the embodiment of heterosexual desirability for an entire generation of young women. The gap between this manufactured image and his authentic identity created extraordinary pressure, even by Hollywood standards. The transformation from Arthur Gellion, his birth name, into Tab Hunter began with agent Henry Wilson, the same talent manager who created Rock Hudson. Wilson specialized in developing handsome young men into stars, often giving them hypermasculine stage names that projected the rugged heterosexuality audiences expected. As Hunter's career took off, maintaining his fictional straight image required increasingly elaborate arrangements that went far beyond simply staying quiet about his personal life. Hunter maintained serious relationships with men while dating studio-approved starlets for the cameras, Collins explains. This wasn't merely hiding his private life. It required active participation in constructing an alternative reality. He was regularly photographed on studio-arranged dates with young actresses, creating the public impression of an active dating life with women, while his authentic romantic relationships remained completely hidden. Among Hunter's most significant relationships was with actor Anthony Perkins, star of Psycho, a connection that remained secret during both men's prime years as Hollywood heartthrobs. Their relationship lasted several years, but was known only to their closest friends, while the public consumed entirely fictional narratives about both men's romantic lives with women. The pressure of maintaining this deception created extraordinary strain, not just professional challenges, but deep personal conflict for a young man attempting to reconcile his authentic self with the commercially valuable fiction he was required to embody. His smile sold tickets, but the truth would have cost him everything. This fundamental trap defined Hunter's career. His commercial value depended entirely on projecting an image that fundamentally contradicted his reality. Unlike stars whose deceptions involved hiding specific behaviors while maintaining authentic aspects of their identity, Hunter's entire public persona was constructed in opposition to his actual self. Hunter's career declined in the early 1960s as musical tastes changed and newer teen idols emerged. This professional setback, while difficult, ultimately provided liberation from the exhausting performance of heterosexuality that had defined his peak years. In subsequent decades, he worked sporadically in film and television while living a more authentic private life, though still without public acknowledgement of his sexuality. Hunter only came out decades later in his 2005 memoir, notes Collins. He waited until he was in his 70s, 50 years after his peak fame, to publicly confirm what had long been rumored. His autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential, finally allowed him to acknowledge his gay identity after decades of silence. Hunter's belated coming out at age 74 received generally positive public response, but this acceptance came long after the commercial prime of his career, after decades when such honesty would have meant instant professional destruction. His story reveals not just personal struggle, but the complex participation of audiences in maintaining Hollywood fictions. the willing suspension of disbelief that extended from movie plots to the very identities of the stars who portrayed them. His smile sold tickets, but the truth would have cost him everything. This simple statement highlights the cold financial calculations that drove Hollywood's enforced closet, the industry assessment that audiences would reject authentic identities while embracing manufactured ones. Hunter's value as a product depended entirely on maintaining the fiction that teenage girls across America could potentially date him, a marketable fantasy that reality would have shattered. Hunter's eventual honesty in his final years provided a measure of personal resolution while offering valuable historical insight into an era when studios exercised nearly complete control over stars' public identities. After a life marked by the exhausting maintenance of fiction, he spent his final years, he died in 2018 at age 86, in the relative peace of acknowledged truth, a luxury denied to many of his contemporaries who never lived to tell their own authentic stories.
For it started many years ago when I was born in a trunk in the Princess Theater.
The broken idol, Judy Garland. Judy Garland wasn't just acting in The Wizard of Oz. Her most convincing performance was pretending to be happy while Hollywood systematically destroyed her. While many Golden Age stars concealed aspects of identity that contradicted social norms, Garland's deception involved projecting wholesome perfection while living a reality of exploitation, addiction, and psychological damage that began in childhood and continued throughout her tragically shortened life. Garland was publicly marketed as the wholesome girl next door, explains entertainment historian Robert Thompson. From her early MGM roles through The Wizard of Oz, she was presented as the embodiment of innocent American girlhood, sweet, untroubled, and naturally talented. This image couldn't have been further from the reality of her daily existence at the studio. Behind this carefully maintained facade lay a young performer subjected to extraordinary abuse from the earliest days of her career. Signed to MGM at age 13, Garland entered a system that viewed child performers as products to be shaped, controlled, and exploited with little regard for their development as human beings. Privately, Garland suffered crippling addiction, abuse, and breakdowns. Thompson continues. The gap between her public image and private reality wasn't just about hiding embarrassing behavior. It involved concealing systematic abuse that the studio itself inflicted, then blamed her for the inevitable consequences. This abuse took multiple forms, from the psychological to the pharmaceutical. Studio executives regularly criticized Garland's appearance, calling her fat and ugly, while placing her on strict diets and actively feeding her insecurities about her looks compared to more conventionally beautiful MGM stars. This psychological pressure was accompanied by the studio's direct involvement in beginning and maintaining her drug dependencies, a particularly disturbing aspect of Hollywood's control system. MGM gave her pills as a child, then punished her when she needed them as an adult, Thompson explains. The studio literally administered amphetamines to keep her energy up during grueling shooting schedules and barbiturates to help her sleep afterward, creating a dependency in a child too young to understand the consequences. Then, when she inevitably developed addiction issues, they treated her as if she had failed morally rather than acknowledging their role in creating the problem. This pattern established a destructive cycle that would follow Garland throughout her career, the studio simultaneously causing and condemning her struggles while presenting an entirely different narrative to the public. When production problems occurred due to her increasing inability to function under these conditions, the studio's publicity department worked overtime to protect MGM's investment rather than addressing the underlying issues. She wasn't born broken, the machine broke her and kept selling the pieces. This exploitative cycle defined Garland's relationship with Hollywood, a system that damaged her, profited from that damage, then marketed a completely fictional alternative reality while continuing the very practices that caused her suffering. The human cost became increasingly evident as Garland matured, with multiple death attempts, psychiatric hospitalizations, and escalating addiction issues that the studio alternately enabled and punished depending on immediate production needs. Throughout these crises, the publicity machine continued presenting her as merely high-strung or sensitive, rather than acknowledging the systematic mistreatment that had created these conditions. After leaving MGM in 1950, following 15 years under contract, Garland continued struggling with the dependencies and psychological damage established during her formative years. While she achieved remarkable professional successes, including her legendary 1961 Carnegie Hall concert and an Oscar nomination for A Star is Born, 1954, these triumphs occurred against a backdrop of continued personal struggle directly traceable to her treatment during Hollywood's golden age. She wasn't born broken. The machine broke her and kept selling the pieces. This statement also highlights how the entertainment industry not only created Garland's problems, but commodified them, transforming her suffering into marketable narrative throughout her career and beyond. Her public struggles became part of her appeal, reframed as the tragic vulnerability that made her performances so emotionally resonant, while the industry's responsibility remained carefully hidden. Garland's premature death at age 47 from an accidental barbiturate overdose in 1969 represented the final consequence of the deception that had defined her public image, a stark contrast between the bright-eyed Dorothy, who represented American optimism, and the exploited performer who had been sacrificed to the very system that created her iconic status.
Who was that?
Just a girl, Mama. No, Mama. I don't... Mama, I just met her.
The tormented talent, Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift brought something new to post-war Hollywood, a sensitive, introspective masculinity that contrasted sharply with the more straightforward tough guys who had dominated the industry. His extraordinary talent quickly established him as one of the most gifted actors of his generation, earning him 4 Academy Award nominations and universal critical acclaim. Behind this professional success lay a life defined by constant tension between his authentic self and the constraints of an industry that would not accept his sexuality, creating a division that contributed to the psychological struggles and eventual physical decline that would cut short his brilliant career. Clift was one of the most gifted actors of his time, and deeply closeted, explains film historian Michael Barnes. Unlike some stars who merely concealed their private lives, Clift experienced profound psychological conflict about his sexuality. This wasn't just about hiding his gay identity from the public, it was about his own complex relationship with that identity, creating internal tensions that affected both his personal happiness and his approach to acting. Clift's closeted status wasn't merely career protection, but reflected both the social attitudes of his era and his own complicated feelings about sexuality. Raised in a somewhat unconventional but socially ambitious family, he developed a sensitive, artistic temperament that struggled with the rigid gender and sexual expectations of mid-century America. His approach to managing this conflict involved maintaining strict separation between his public and private lives, creating distinct worlds that rarely overlapped. Unlike stars who participated in studio-arranged dates or marriages, Clift generally avoided romantic publicity altogether, presenting himself as devoted to his craft rather than engaging in elaborate heterosexual performances. This strategy provided some protection, but created its own psychological strain. Maintaining these separate identities required constant vigilance and prevented the development of an integrated, authentic self. Colleagues often described Clift as containing multiple personas that seemed to operate independently, a fragmentation that contributed to his increasing reliance on alcohol and prescription medications. The most publicly visible crisis in Clift's carefully compartmentalized life occurred in 1956, when a devastating car accident left him with facial injuries that permanently altered his appearance. This physical trauma added another layer to the deception that defined his career as the industry scrambled to minimize public understanding of how significantly the accident had affected both his appearance and his health. After a near-fatal car accident, studios covered up the extent of his physical and emotional trauma, Barnes explains. This wasn't just about hiding scars. It involved concealing how the accident had affected his ability to work, his increasing dependency on pain medication and alcohol, and the psychological impact of having his appearance altered at the height of his career as a leading man. The accident created a visible dividing line in Clift's filmography and life, pre-accident and post-accident periods that marked not just physical changes, but accelerating personal struggles. While he continued creating remarkable performances, the combination of physical pain, addiction issues, and the ongoing strain of concealing his sexuality created mounting challenges that the public never fully understood during his lifetime. He was haunted by pain, ashamed of his truth, and the studio said smile anyway. This multi-layered deception defined Cliff's later career, not just concealing his sexuality, but hiding the extent of his physical suffering and psychological distress while maintaining the professional facade necessary to continue working in an unforgiving industry. As his health declined through the late 1950s and early 1960s, the gap between public perception and private reality grew increasingly wide. While audiences occasionally glimpsed his struggles through delayed productions and visible changes in his appearance, the full extent of his suffering remained largely hidden behind carefully managed publicity and the inherent privacy of mental health issues. Cliff's death in 1966 at just 45 years old brought an end to both his remarkable career and the exhausting performance of normality that had accompanied it. While officially attributed to heart failure, his death represented the culmination of years of physical and psychological decline directly connected to the divided life he had been forced to maintain. He was haunted by pain, ashamed of his truth, and the studio said smile anyway. This highlights the fundamental inhumanity of a system that valued marketable images over the well-being of the people who created them, that could profit from Cliff's extraordinary emotional vulnerability on screen while denying him the opportunity to live with authentic vulnerability in his actual life.
Why don't you kick me too, Pop? Because you're right, I'm not a baby anymore. I'm getting a chance to play.
The silenced truth teller, Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo represents a particularly revealing case in Hollywood's evolving but consistently problematic approach to LGBTQ+ identities. Unlike stars who maintained strict secrecy throughout their careers, Mineo existed in a complex middle ground, neither completely closeted nor able to live openly, that illuminates how Hollywood's control mechanisms adapted to changing social attitudes while continuing to limit authentic self-expression. Mineo was openly gay among friends, but kept closeted publicly, explains entertainment journalist Rebecca Santos. He represents a transitional figure in Hollywood's approach to sexuality, someone who maintained a degree of personal authenticity within private circles while still conforming to public expectations for his career. This created a fragmented existence that became increasingly difficult to maintain as his career progressed. Mineo's breakthrough came with his role as Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, where his performance as a troubled teenager with an implied crush on James Dean's character earned him an Academy Award nomination and established him as one of Hollywood's most promising young talents. This early success created professional expectations that would prove increasingly difficult to reconcile with his personal reality. As Mineo matured beyond teenage roles, his career faced growing constraints directly connected to perceptions about his sexuality. While never officially out by modern standards, his relative openness within industry circles created limitations that more completely closeted actors could sometimes avoid. Mineo was typecast as the sensitive sidekick, but barred from leading roles once his sexuality became an open secret. Santos continues, this created a cruel catch-22. The very qualities that made his performances distinctive and compelling became reasons to limit his opportunities once they became associated with his rumored sexuality. He found himself simultaneously valued for his talent and penalized for the authentic self that informed that talent. This professional constraint became increasingly evident by the mid-1960s as Mineo struggled to transition from youth roles to adult parts that would allow his continued development as an actor, while contemporaries with similar early success found pathways to adult stardom. Mineo faced diminishing opportunities directly connected to industry discomfort with his perceived sexuality. Rather than simply accepting these limitations, Mineo began taking increasingly bold steps toward authentic self-expression, both personally and professionally, that challenged Hollywood's established boundaries. His efforts to develop projects that would allow more complex exploration of identity represented early attempts to expand the industry's limited perspective. He tried to tell the truth, and Hollywood turned off his mic. This captures the industry's response to Mineo's attempts at greater authenticity, not outright rejection, but a more insidious form of marginalization that gradually reduced his access to significant opportunities while avoiding any explicit acknowledgement of the reasons. The final chapter of Mineo's story added another layer of tragic complexity to his already complicated relationship with Hollywood. His murder in 1976, at age 37, stabbed outside his West Hollywood apartment during a robbery attempt, became subject to sensationalized coverage that often emphasized rumored aspects of his personal life rather than focusing on his artistic contributions or the criminal investigation. Mineo was murdered under mysterious circumstances, his case initially unsolved, notes Santos. While police eventually identified and convicted his killer 2 years later, the immediate aftermath of his death revealed how quickly media narratives gravitated toward sensationalized speculation about his personal life rather than treating his murder with the same respect afforded to other Hollywood figures. This posthumous treatment represented a final indignity, the reduction of a multifaceted artist to tabloid fodder, based primarily on his sexuality rather than his significant creative contributions. Even in death, the industry and media ecosystem that had constrained his authentic self-expression continued treating that authenticity as something scandalous, rather than simply human. He tried to tell the truth, and Hollywood turned off his mic. This also highlights the particular punishment reserved for those who attempted to challenge the system's restrictions. The way Mineo's relative openness compared to completely closeted contemporaries resulted in greater career limitations rather than increased freedom. Mineo's legacy represents an important transitional figure in Hollywood's treatment of LGBTQ+ identities, neither completely hidden nor fully expressed, but existing in the uncomfortable middle ground that illuminated both the beginning of change and the persistent restrictions that continued limiting authentic representation both on and off screen.
It is hemmed in by banks on both sides.
You know what I mean?
The boundary-crossing icon, Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was Hollywood's original rule-breaker, a star who managed to push sexual and gender boundaries while somehow maintaining her status as one of the industry's most bankable actresses. Unlike performers who maintain strict separation between public fiction and private reality, Dietrich created a more complex interplay between revelation and concealment, pushing boundaries while still operating within a system that demanded certain fundamental deceptions about her intimate life. Dietrich was a fashion icon and screen siren, but openly bisexual in private circles, explains film historian Margaret Collins. Her approach to managing her sexuality wasn't simply about hiding. It involved sophisticated navigation of different contexts, revealing aspects of her authentic self in controlled environments while maintaining plausible deniability in more public spheres. This nuanced approach reflected both Dietrich's European background and her exceptional power within the studio system. Born and initially established in Weimar-era Berlin, a notably more sexually progressive environment than Hollywood, Dietrich brought a fundamentally different perspective on sexuality than many American contemporaries. Her immense international fame also provided leverage that allowed greater personal freedom than less established stars could risk. Dietrich's public image represented a carefully calibrated balance, projecting seductive femininity that appealed to male audiences while incorporating elements of gender nonconformity that hinted at more complex realities without explicitly acknowledging them. Hollywood cleaned up her image for the press, hiding her long string of female lovers, Collins continues. This wasn't complete erasure, but selective presentation, emphasizing her relationships with men while obscuring equally significant connections with women. The studio publicity machine focused exclusively on her marriages and affairs with famous men, creating the impression of conventional heterosexuality, despite ample evidence to the contrary within industry circles. This selective presentation allowed Dietrich to maintain a career based on her appeal to mainstream audiences while living a personal life that diverged significantly from the public narrative. Unlike stars who experienced their closeted status as primarily restrictive, Dietrich created spaces of relative freedom within the constraints of her era, engaging in relationships with women, including writer Mercedes de Acosta, actress Edith Piaf, and possibly Greta Garbo, while maintaining the public fiction of exclusive heterosexuality. What made Dietrich particularly significant was her willingness to incorporate subtle challenges to gender and sexual conventions directly into her performances, creating a public persona that hinted at the complexity beneath without explicitly naming it. She wore a tux, kissed women, and still convinced the world she was every man's fantasy. Dietrich's remarkable ability to push boundaries while avoiding career-ending consequences stemmed from her strategic approach. Her most iconic performances, particularly in films like Morocco, where she famously dressed in men's clothing and kissed a woman, incorporated elements of sexual and gender fluidity that mainstream audiences accepted as theatrical without recognizing their connection to her authentic identity. This strategy, hiding in plain sight by presenting aspects of her reality as performance rather than identity, represented a uniquely sophisticated approach to navigating Hollywood's restrictions. Rather than maintaining complete separation between public and private selves, Dietrich created a public persona that incorporated elements of authenticity presented as artistic expression rather than personal revelation. The effectiveness of this approach depended on specific cultural contexts that allowed certain behaviors to be interpreted as artistic rather than biographical. Dietrich's foreign origin, exotic mystique, and theatrical performance style created space for gender play and sexual ambiguity that would have been more threatening coming from stars perceived as representing American values. She wore a tux, kissed women, and still convinced the world she was every man's fantasy. This also highlights how Dietrich's exceptional beauty and seductive screen presence provided protection that less conventionally attractive performers might not have enjoyed. The way her overwhelming appeal to the heterosexual male gaze created permission for behaviors that might otherwise have threatened her marketability. Dietrich's navigation of Hollywood's restrictions reveals both the system's fundamental limitations and the occasional possibilities for negotiating greater authenticity within those constraints. While still required to maintain significant deceptions about central aspects of her identity, she created a public persona that incorporated more truth than many contemporaries could risk, establishing a model of sophisticated boundary negotiation that later generations of stars would build upon as cultural attitudes gradually evolved. The tragic end, Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro's story represents one of Hollywood's most tragic illustrations of how completely the gap between public image and private reality could destroy the very person that image was created to promote. As one of the industry's first Latin American stars and a leading man during the silent era, Novarro embodied both the possibilities and limitations of early Hollywood for performers from marginalized backgrounds, achieving extraordinary success while maintaining deceptions that ultimately contributed to his violent death. Novarro was a silent film star and devout Catholic, secretly gay, explains film historian Robert Thompson. He occupied an exceptionally complex position. A Mexican actor who achieved stardom playing roles from various ethnicities during Hollywood's earliest decades, and a deeply religious man whose sexuality placed him in perpetual conflict with his faith. These contradictions created extraordinary psychological pressure that informed both his career and its tragic conclusion. Born José Ramón Gil Samaniego in Durango, Mexico, Novarro arrived in Hollywood during the early 1920s, a period when the film industry was establishing the star system that would define entertainment for generations. His exceptional good looks and natural charisma quickly attracted attention, leading to his breakthrough role in The Prisoner of Zenda, 1922, and eventual stardom as the title character in Ben-Hur, 1925. As his career developed, so did the carefully constructed public persona that would both enable his success and constrain his authentic self-expression. Studio publicists crafted an image emphasizing his Catholic devotion, refined tastes, and bachelor status, positioning him as an exotic but non-threatening alternative to established American leading men. The studio created a wholesome image, while Novarro lived in constant fear of exposure, Thompson continues. This wasn't simply professional concern, but existential terror. Novarro genuinely believed that public knowledge of his sexuality would destroy not just his career, but his standing in the religious community that formed a central part of his identity. The potential consequences extended far beyond Hollywood into his sense of spiritual worth and cultural belonging. This fear created a divided existence that became increasingly difficult to maintain as his career progressed. While Novarro established a private life that included relationships with men, maintaining absolute secrecy about these connections required extraordinary vigilance and prevented the development of lasting partnerships that might have provided emotional support during professional challenges. The transition to sound films in the late 1920s created additional pressures, as Novarro's slight accent and changing audience tastes affected his standing as a leading man. As his career opportunities gradually diminished through the 1930s, the gap between his public image and private reality became an increasingly heavy burden, creating isolation that contributed to periodic struggles with alcohol and depression. After his MGM contract ended in 1935, Navarro continued working in films and later television, but never recaptured his earlier prominence. Throughout these professional transitions, maintaining his carefully constructed public image remained a constant requirement, preventing him from developing an integrated identity that might have supported greater resilience during career setbacks. The tragic conclusion to Navarro's story came on October 30th, 1968, when he was brutally murdered in his Hollywood Hills home by two young men he had invited for what he believed would be a social encounter, but was actually a robbery attempt. The killers, brothers Paul and Tom Ferguson, ages 22 and 17, had targeted Navarro based on false rumors that he kept large sums of cash in his house, leading to a vicious assault that ended his life at age 69. Navarro died in a violent robbery connected to a sexual encounter, notes Thompson. The circumstances of his death created a final, cruel exposure of the very aspects of his identity he had spent his entire career concealing. Media coverage of his murder often contained thinly veiled references to his sexuality, transforming his tragic end into a sensationalized scandal that posthumously revealed what he had so carefully hidden in life. This posthumous exposure represented a final indignity, the reduction of a pioneering artist to tabloid headlines that emphasized the very aspects of identity he had struggled to protect throughout his career. Even in death, the gap between public narrative and private reality continued defining how Navarro was perceived and remembered. He built his career on lies and died for a truth he couldn't live out loud. This captures the tragic irony of Navarro's story, the way the deception that enabled his success ultimately contributed to the isolation and vulnerability that led to his death. Had he been able to live authentically, developing open connections and community rather than engaging in high-risk encounters with strangers, the specific circumstances that led to his murder might never have occurred.
Is that what you want from a man?
Confidence. I want a man to give me confidence. Somebody to fight off the blizzards and the floods. Somebody to beat off the world when it tries to swallow you up.
The ambiguous icon, Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck played tough dames on screen and created Hollywood's most sophisticated approach to privacy off-screen. Unlike stars who maintained obvious fictions about their private lives, Stanwyck crafted a more nuanced strategy to privacy that neither confirmed nor denied speculation about her sexuality. She established professional independence rare for women of her era, while keeping her personal life carefully guarded behind boundaries the press largely respected. Stanwyck married twice, but lived with a female companion for decades, notes entertainment historian Michael Barnes. Her relationship with publicist Helen Ferguson extended far beyond professional boundaries into a domestic partnership that lasted from the 1950s until Stanwyck's death in 1990. While never publicly acknowledged as romantic, their living arrangement and constant companionship generated persistent speculation within Hollywood circles. What distinguished Stanwyck from many contemporaries was her refusal to create elaborate heterosexual fictions beyond her two marriages. Her first marriage to vaudeville performer Frank Fay lasted from 1928 to 1935, while her second to actor Robert Taylor endured from 1939 to 1951. After these relationships ended, Stanwyck made no effort to maintain the appearance of active dating or romantic interest in men that studio publicists typically arranged for unmarried female stars. This departure from standard publicity practices attracted attention within the industry, where Stanwyck's independence and close female relationships generated increasing speculation about her sexuality. Rather than directly addressing these rumors, Stanwyck maintained studied ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying private matters, while focusing public discussion exclusively on her professional work. Industry insiders long believed she was a closeted lesbian, protected by studio PR, Barnes continues. This belief wasn't based on explicit confirmation, but on the accumulation of evidence over decades. Her living arrangement with Ferguson, her close friendships with other women rumored to be lesbians, including Tallulah Bankhead, and her notable lack of male companionship following her second divorce. Stanwyck's approach to handling speculation reflected both personal temperament and professional calculation. Unlike stars who participated in studio-arranged dates or publicized romances to counter rumors, Stanwyck simply refused to engage with speculation about her private life, establishing boundaries that the press generally respected due to her formidable professional reputation and no-nonsense personality. Stanwyck refused to comment publicly about her private life, notes Barnes. This wasn't just about protecting specific relationships, but establishing a broader principle that her personal matters remained outside the legitimate scope of public discussion. By maintaining consistent boundaries rather than offering selective disclosures, Stanwyck created a separation between her professional and private selves that was unusual for female stars of her era. The effectiveness of this strategy depended partly on Stanwyck's exceptional professional standing. Having established herself as one of Hollywood's most respected actresses through critically acclaimed performances in films like Double Indemnity, The Lady Eve, and Stella Dallas, Stanwyck possessed unusual leverage for a female performer, allowing her to resist publicity demands that less established actresses might have been forced to accept. She didn't deny it. She just never let them print it. This sophisticated approach to privacy management didn't involve actively constructing fictional heterosexual narratives like many closeted stars, but simply refusing to provide confirmation of any narrative about her private life. This created space for authentic living within private circles while maintaining public ambiguity that protected her career interests. What makes Stanwyck's case particularly significant is how it demonstrates the different standards applied to male and female stars regarding sexuality. While men like Rock Hudson were required to construct elaborate heterosexual performances through arranged dates and marriages, Stanwyck maintained her career without similar efforts, suggesting either that lesbian relationships registered differently in public consciousness or that Stanwyck's particular star image created unique possibilities for privacy. This gendered double standard reflected broader societal attitudes toward female sexuality during this period. The tendency to view women's relationships through a lens of friendship rather than romance unless explicitly framed otherwise. The same Boston marriage dynamic that allowed some women to maintain same-sex partnerships without scrutiny in earlier eras may have provided Stanwyck partial protection that male stars couldn't access. She didn't deny it, she just never let them print it. This also highlights Stanwyck's understanding of how media coverage functioned during her era. The way maintaining personal boundaries while delivering exceptional professional performance could create a tacit agreement where certain subjects remained off-limits in mainstream press. Unlike stars who engaged in elaborate deceptions that required constant maintenance, Stanwyck established clear boundaries that the media largely respected throughout her career.